For this exercise, we are going to use some data from the 2020 and 2010 redistricting data files. So these are this is really the first detailed data that we get from the decennial census every 10 years. And it's fairly simple. I have cut this down quite a bit. This is not the full file, but I gave you some key things. So what down at the bottom, you can see there's 3 sheets: data, regions, and record layout. Let's look at record layout first. This shows you what we have in this file. So this is counties in California. So there's one record for each county. And then for each county, we have several pieces of information from the 2010 census, and then the same pieces of information repeated, but for the 2020 census. So there's some things the main thing is the columns starting with 2010 Hispanic Latino population, white non-Hispanic, black non-Hispanic, down. This is the table that they produce that combines race and ethnicity. So it tells us how many Hispanic people identified themselves as Hispanic, and then how many people identified themselves as non-Hispanic, broken down by the racial groups. Now, your first question might be, well, why don't they have the Hispanic population broken down by what racial groups they are in? That is not here, but if we were to include another set of data, which is the total everybody broken down by the racial groups, you could subtract off this non-Hispanic white from the total white, for example, and you would get the Hispanic white if you wanted to do that. We're not going to do that here just for sake of simplicity. We're going to keep it real simple today. The other thing that's in here that might be unfamiliar to you is what's called the diversity index score. This is an index that is a scale from 0 to 100, and it measures the likelihood that a person in that county would encounter another person who is of a different race and ethnicity than they are. So this is a different thing than just saying what percent of the population is non-white, for example, because let's say there's a neighborhood that is entirely black. That neighborhood would have a very low diversity score, but it would have a very high non-white population percentage. But a neighborhood with a wide mix of white, black, Asian, Hispanic, Native American, like a mix of all of them, would have a very high diversity index score. So that's the big difference between these two. All right, so these are the fields we have, and you'll see the naming conventions kind of go, they follow a pattern, and they are the same in both the 2010 and the 2020 data. This is actually data I got from the big local news and the Associated Press consortium that combined to make this redistricting data in 2020 more readily available for everybody. This is not the full file that they produced. I knocked it down to some more columns, but you can get this exact same data with all the columns that they produced from Big Local News, where you just create a Gmail login for free, and then you can access their Census 2020 repository. And this is from there's a county file. So it's one row for each county, and the county file that they provided is all the counties in the US. So I knocked it down to just California to make it simple. So we have 58 rows of data plus the header row up here at the top. There's the header row. Okay, so that's our data. There's another sheet called regions that I've created as a lookup. I took this map and I created a list of all the counties and then listed what region they fall in. We're going to use this as a lookup table to join back to our data set so that we could summarize data by these regions in addition to just looking at it by county. All right, so that's a little more advanced. Let's get going here on our analysis. So you may have noticed that we have our total population, and then we have the populations of each groups, but we don't have some other calculations that we may want to do. For example, how many people were non-white in 2020, how many were non-white in 2010, and how did that change between the 2 years? Of course, like we did in the last lesson, we could work those calculations out here on the right, create new columns in our data set, and do those calculations here. However, I want to show you another way that is kind of useful, especially when you do have a big sheet like this with a lot of rows and columns. This can, get a little overwhelming real fast. Even if you were to use freeze panes like we did in the last exercise, it sometimes gets to be a lot. So this is another option. So what we're going to do is insert a pivot table. So go to the Insert menu and choose Pivot Table. And it's going to guess that this is the range you want because your cursor should have been somewhere in the middle of the data. So it should be A1 to Y59 in the table range thing. Say OK, and it's going to create a pivot table in a new worksheet. That should be how you operate any pivot table if you've not done pivot tables before. See if I can make this look a little bigger. The right side is not going to look a lot bigger, but for a pivot table, here's some things you need to know. Over on the right is the designer. It has a list of all your columns, and then it has the filters, columns, rows, and values boxes. The rows and the values boxes are the ones that are necessary to do even the most basic pivot table. The other filters and columns are optional, and we will use them as we go along here. But if you want, when you do a pivot table, you want to think about what you want your answer to look at. What does each row need to represent? Well, we want it to represent each county in the state. So we would pick county name, and you'll see that it'll make the list of counties. In this case, our data only has one row for each county, and so that's what we're going to get back. But if you had a data set where there's multiple rows for each county, maybe with something that is measuring car accidents, for example, it would still give you one row for each county. Now, we want, for values, we want to know how many people were non-white in 2010 and how many people were non-white in 2020. So we're going to go up here in your menus at the top. You should have a new menu called Pivot Table Analyze. And one of the options under there is Fields, Items, and Sets. Click on that and choose Calculated Field. So the first option, Calculated Field. And that's going to bring up a little box that I don't think I can make any bigger for the video. But you'll see it has a name and a formula box, and it also lists your fields down at the bottom. So you can do this in a very point and clicky way. So let's start by giving our new column a name. I'm going to say non-white 2010. And then in the formula box, I'm going to get rid of that 0 that's there. And then you can start picking off your columns that you want to do the math on. In this case, we want to take the 2010 population minus, and so you just push the minus button on your keyboard, white non-Hispanic. We're going to take them off the total, and that's going to give us the total of everybody else, the non-white population. And then you can say OK, and it's going to create a new column in your pivot table, and it's going to show up in your values box. Notice it's saying sum of non-white. So for example, let's do Alpine County. It's easy, 323 people. If you click on values, on sum of non-white 2010, and then go to value field settings, you'll see the summarized value field by, there's different different things. If we were to select minimum, for example, we're still going to get the same numbers because it's not really doing any math. It's actually just, it's not summarizing rows. All it did was did the math between two columns in this case. But if you were doing a situation like I mentioned, the car accidents, and you had multiple rows for each column, then what you choose here, summarize value field by, would be super important. You would either probably need a count or a sum, depending on what you're doing. And we'll talk more about that in future lessons, but I'll leave it at sum for now. You'll see that this is working just fine. And then we can go back now and do another one. So go up to Fields, Items, and Sets and choose Calculated Field. And this time do non-white 2020. And so this time the formula is going to be the 2020 population, which is down the list a bit, minus the white non-Hispanic 2020 pop. And then we're going to say OK. And there we go. So now, notice we have these two new columns here in our pivot table. If you jump out to your data set, so our pivot table is now in sheet 1. If we go to data, the data sheet, those new columns are not going to be over there. Nope, there's no new columns in our data. So these calculated columns are only living in this pivot table. They're not going to live in your underlying data. That's good, that's bad, take it what you will, but this is an option. Now we can do that, we can do one more, go back to pivot table, analyze, fields, items, and sets, calculated field. Let's do the percent change in non-white. And so that would actually, if you look in this list of fields here, your two new columns are here. So we're going to say the new non-white 2020, minus non-white 2010 divided by non-white 2010 and say OK. There's the percent change. We can highlight this and turn it to a percentage. Let's just go to the home menu and click on this percent style button up at the top. And then you can sort your pivot table now. What I like to do is put my cursor on the first value in the column I want to sort. So in this case, the 22 for Alameda County. Go to the data menu, and there's an A to Z and a Z to A button. I'm going to push Z to A, and it'll sort the whole pivot table highest to smallest. So we could now save this sheet. I'm going to click on sheet 1 down in the lower corner, and it'll turn gray. Once it's gray, I can start typing, and I'll label this. I'll call it non-white. If you're going to have a lot of sheets in your workbook, highly recommend labels like this to make sure you don't get screwed up about what's in what sheet. All right, so that is calculated columns. Let's now do a little more work with pivot table. Well, first of all, let's put this regions information, attach it to the data information using VLOOKUP. So VLOOKUP is a way that you can actually join two sets of data together. This is something that Excel is not the greatest at. Something like SQL or a programming language will do much better at joining two data sets together. But in this case, we want to create a new column that has that identifies what region Alameda County is, what region Alpine County is, what region Amador County is. And so we have this county code and this county name in our original data, and then our regions lookup also has those exact same values presented exactly the same way. One is Alameda County. It works best if you do have a code versus words. Words, you're far more likely to run into spelling errors or inconsistencies than you are on codes. So if you can, do this join on codes. The first thing you need to know about this joining is that your lookup table, the place where you're going to go find some information, the far leftmost column needs to be whatever you're joining on. So in this case, I have my county code as my far left column. If I wanted to join on my county name, I need to make sure to tell it that this is the first column, and you're going to see that here in a second. But it doesn't matter where it is on the sheet. It could be way over in column T, but it just needs to be to the left of whatever it is you're going to copy over. In this case, we're going to copy over this region, which is in the third column here of our little lookup table. All right, so let's go back to the data menu and let's go between, I'm going to click on the column F and right mouse click and choose Insert to drop a new column in here, and I'm going to call this Region. And this is going to be where we're going to put our new data. I'll make this a little bigger for you. Okay, so the VLOOKUP formula, and there's a tip sheet on my website here. VLOOKUP has several, you can see in here it has several arguments. And the first argument is, what is it that we're looking up? And in this case, in your data, you would, whatever it is that you're matching between your data and your lookup table, that's the thing you're looking up. In this case, it's this county code. So we're going to say D2 because that's the first county code that we want to look up. And then it's asking for a table array. And that means it's asking for your lookup. Where's your lookup? You could type in all the cell addresses that you need here, but what I like to do is use my mouse, put it to good use. So when you get to this point, go click on your Regions tab and then highlight your whole lookup table. And this works especially good if your lookup table is not terribly long. And it's going to put green running dots around your table. And now up in the formula bar right at the top of the sheet, stay right in your region sheet, there's your formula is right there. You'll see VLOOKUP D2 comma, and then it added in a bunch of code for you. Regions exclamation point, which is the name of the sheet, and then A1 to C59, which is the range for this lookup. You need to put in anchors on the A1 and the C59. If you're on a Windows machine, you can go in front of the A and push F4, and then go in front of the C and push F4. If you're on a Mac, I think you'll have to hand put in those $signs. I don't think a Mac has that functionality. You just put in a $sign in front of the A and after the A, in front of the C and after the C. And then you do a comma. And you'll see that it's now put us back in our original data sheet. It's spun us back and you can see the formula. I'm going to continue working up here in the formula bar. If you accidentally click somewhere incorrectly, it could wreck your little formula here. So that the pointing and clicking with the mouse that I was doing can be tricky. And if you find that to be too cumbersome, you can just put this formula right in. You just need to know the start, which is A1, and the end, which is C59, and where to put in the $signs and the exclamation point, regions exclamation point in front of your formula. Now the next thing it's asking for is column index number. And that means which column in your lookup table do you want to bring over? And they're not referring to a letter like column C. They're referring to an index number in your array. And in this case, that is the number 3 because it's the third column in our lookup table. Like I said, it doesn't matter that it's in C or D or E or F or any of that. It's the relationship to the first column. So in this case, it's the number 3. And then you put another comma, and then the last argument is either true or false. False means you want an exact match. Like you want it number 1 to match to number 1, number 3 to match to number 3, 5 to 5. And so you put the word false in there. If you were to do the word true, it would do an approximate match. And so that works if you're doing something like, does this fall between midnight and 1 a.m. or does this fall between 1 and 2 a.m.? That kind of thing. That's a different style of lookup table, and it's less likely that you're going to use that. We're going to do so we should have false. So you should have VLOOKUP D2, your array, comma 3, comma false. Hit enter, and then copy your formula down and make sure it went all the way to the bottom. I hit Control period to get to the bottom. If you're on a Mac, it should be Command period. And then you want to check it and make sure all the ones were filled in. One way you can do that is turn on the filter and then pull down on region and make sure you don't have any nulls or error messages in this list of options. So we do not. It looks like it worked. So then the last thing we can do is if we want to lock this in so it's no longer a formula, we can click on this and choose copy. We're clicked on the whole column, and then right on top of the same column choose paste special, and it brings up these options, and you can choose values, and that will drop in the answer and get rid of the formula. Say OK. The other option is this paste 1, 2, 3 button is paste special values. Okay, so now if you click on any of these, you'll see up in the formula bar there's no formula anymore. Now we have a region. I'm going to hit escape to get rid of my green running ants, and I'll turn off my filters. And now we can do a quick pivot table. So let's go to the insert. I want to add up the diversity in each region. Or we could actually, how about we just look at the total population change in each region. So let's do insert pivot table. And so it's giving us the range and saying new worksheet. That's good. And then I'll make this bigger. This time instead of the county name, we want the region. But look, it's not showing up in my list of fields. So you might have to go up here and choose refresh. There we go. And then it shows up in here. So under pivot table analyze, there's refresh. There's also change data source if somehow it's not grabbing all the columns that you want it to. So I'm going to drag region down to the rows. And so now we have each region. Now, if you put the 2010 population in the values box, it's going to choose sum of 2010 population. And what it's doing is it's adding up all the values in that column for all of the rows that have, for example, Bay Area listed as the region. And so it's truly summarizing that whole column. I'm going to drag 2020 pop down and get that as well. And now we have our two populations. We can do the okay, so now we've got a couple options for doing the calculations. We can to say, well, how did this change? We can go and do a calculated field. We can say percent change, and we can do the new population 2020 pop minus the old population divided by the old population and say okay, and it, oh, there it is. I got to check it, and it's going to add that to our pivot table here and go to the home menu and make that a percentage, and we can add a decimal point if you want. So the Bay Area grew by 9%, so did Sierra Gold Country. Eastern Sierra declined slightly. That's not much of a change, but a little bit of a change. The other way you can do this is not on the pivot table. Well, if you do it on the pivot table like we just did, you can then sort this highest to lowest. You can also do a formula right off of here, but new minus old divided by old, but then you're not going to, oops, I forgot an open parentheses. You're not going to be able to, you'll get the same answer, but you're not going to be able to sort because this is not part of the pivot table itself. So that calculated field is going to do it a little bit better for you. That's all for this one.